Yeah, the decision has been a surprise as well as not a surprise.
A dusty envelope buried deep in Buckingham Palace has just exposed Queen Elizabeth's most shocking secret. King Charles breaks the seal and his hands start shaking. The words he reads about Prince Harry make him go pale. His mother hid this from everyone for a reason. £20 million, a condition so explosive it could end the monarchy. What Harry doesn't know yet will change everything. In the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of royal history seem to whisper from every corner, November the 23rd, 2025 began as an unremarkable day.
I have also learned something that troubles me deeply.
King Charles III settled into his private office that morning with the kind of routine that had become familiar in the 3 years since ascending to the throne. The room itself carried the weight of monarchy, its mahogany furnishings and leather-bound volumes serving as silent witnesses to countless moments of royal decision-making. On this particular morning, the king had scheduled what his staff described as a standard administrative session, a periodic review of his late mother's estate documents that required attention as part of ongoing legal formalities. The meeting had been arranged weeks in advance. Charles's senior legal counsel arrived promptly, accompanied by the keeper of the Privy Purse and 2 additional advisors whose roles in managing royal finances made their presence necessary. They carried with them a leather portfolio containing documents that all parties assumed would be entirely familiar. After all, Queen Elizabeth II's will had been executed according to established protocol more than 3 years earlier, following her death in September 22. The distribution of her properties, including the beloved Balmoral estate in Scotland and Sandringham House in Norfolk, had proceeded as expected. Her private jewellery collection had been allocated among family members. Everything had appeared to be in order. Charles, dressed in one of his customary dark suits, adjusted his reading glasses as the portfolio was opened on the desk before him. The king had developed a reputation over decades of public service for his meticulous attention to detail, and this morning was no exception. Page after page was reviewed, each document confirming what had already been understood and implemented. The main provisions of the will had been carried out precisely as intended. For those gathered in the room, this seemed like nothing more than a necessary formality, the kind of administrative work that comes with managing a royal estate of considerable complexity. Then something unexpected happened. Among the familiar documents lay an envelope that Charles did not immediately recognize. The seal bore his mother's personal insignia, but the envelope itself had been filed in a way that kept it separate from the main body of the will. His legal counsel explained that specific instructions had been attached to this document, stipulating that it should only be presented to the king during a comprehensive estate review, and only after sufficient time had passed since the Queen's death. The timing had been deliberate, carefully calculated by Elizabeth herself. Charles's hands, steady despite the years and the weight of his position, broke the seal. Inside was a document written in his mother's own handwriting. Anyone who had known Queen Elizabeth would have recognized her distinctive script immediately. This was not the flowing penmanship of her younger years when she had signed countless official documents and personal letters with practiced ease. Instead, this writing showed the slight shakiness that had characterized her final months, each letter formed with evident effort but absolute deliberation. The date at the top of the page confirmed what Charles was beginning to suspect. March 15th, 2022. His mother had written this just 6 months before her death, during a period when her health was noticeably declining, and those closest to her knew that time was running short. The room fell into complete silence as Charles began to read. His advisors, trained in the art of discretion that royal service demands, watched their monarch's face carefully. They saw his expression shift from simple curiosity to genuine surprise, and then to something far more complex. A mixture of emotions played across features that had long ago learned the necessity of composure in public settings. But this was not a public moment. This was a son reading words his mother had written specifically for him, words about his other son, the one whose absence from royal life had created a wound that refused to heal. The document before Charles contained a clause that addressed Prince Harry's inheritance in ways that contradicted everything the king had understood about his mother's final wishes. Or perhaps more accurately, it revealed wishes that Elizabeth had deliberately kept hidden until she deemed the time was right. Even in death, the late Queen was demonstrating the strategic thinking that had characterized her 7 decades on the throne. She had always been known for playing what observers called the long game, thinking several moves ahead, protecting her family in ways they might not immediately understand or appreciate. Charles read the passage once, then twice, then a third time. His legal counsel confirmed what was already becoming clear. The document was unquestionably authentic. It had been properly witnessed according to all legal requirements. There could be no question about its validity or its enforceability. The only questions now were far more difficult. What should be done with this information? How should the king proceed? Because the clause did not simply leave Harry a sum of money or a piece of property, things that could be transferred quietly and efficiently. Instead, it contained conditions and stipulations that would require active decisions, potentially difficult conversations, and quite possibly a complete reassessment of the current relationship between the king and his younger son. One of the advisors in the room cleared his throat gently, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the group. They needed guidance on how to proceed. Should His Majesty be given time to consider this discovery privately before any next steps were taken? Should they begin preparing briefing documents for the various parties who would need to be informed? The questions hung in the air, practical matters requiring practical answers. But Charles remained focused on the words his mother had written in her final months, as she must have known with increasing certainty that her time was growing short. The king set the document down carefully and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose in a gesture that conveyed profound weariness. He thought of his mother in her study at Windsor Castle, sitting at her own desk, composing these words in secret. She had told no one about this provision. She had sealed it away with specific instructions about when it should be revealed. Had she imagined this exact scene? Her eldest son, now wearing the crown she had worn for so long, discovering her hidden wishes and having to decide whether to honor them? Of course she had imagined it. Elizabeth II had always thought everything through with extraordinary care. The weight of the crown, both literal and figurative, suddenly felt heavier than usual. Charles had inherited his mother's throne, along with all the responsibilities and burdens that came with it. But he had not anticipated inheriting what amounted to an unsolved family crisis, wrapped in legal provisions that seemed designed to force his hand. Yet that was precisely what sat before him. The document represented a choice, or perhaps more accurately, a test from beyond the grave. Would he honor his mother's clearly stated wishes, even if doing so complicated his own plans and preferences? Or would he find a way, as monarchs sometimes must, to interpret duty in a manner that served the present rather than the past? The advisors continued to wait, patient but expectant. The antique clock on the mantelpiece marked each passing second with steady precision. Outside the palace walls, London carried on with its daily rhythm, millions of people going about their lives completely unaware that inside these historic walls, a discovery had just been made that could alter the course of the House of Windsor. King Charles understood with perfect clarity that whatever decision he made in response to this moment, there would be no going back. His mother's hidden clause was hidden no longer, and now everyone involved would have to deal with the consequences of what she had set in motion from her grave. The document Queen Elizabeth had left behind specified an inheritance for Prince Harry that was both substantial in its financial terms and remarkably complex in its conditions. The provision set aside approximately £20 million from her private estate, a sum that represented significant wealth by any standard but was carefully calibrated to achieve specific purposes. This was not simply a gift of money that Harry could access freely and use as he saw fit. Instead, the inheritance came wrapped in requirements that demonstrated just how carefully the late Queen had considered both her grandson's future and the future of the monarchy itself during her final months. The first condition was explicit and left no room for misinterpretation. Harry would receive full access to his inheritance only upon agreeing to maintain certain meaningful connections to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth nations. The Queen's language in the document was precise, reflecting the input of the trusted legal minds she had consulted in drafting these provisions. She required that Harry spend no fewer than 90 days per year on British soil or within Commonwealth countries, engaged in work that supported either charitable causes or initiatives that benefited communities across the realm. This was a carefully worded requirement that did not demand Harry return to working royal duties in any official capacity. Elizabeth had been far too pragmatic to imagine that such a return was realistic or even desirable given everything that had transpired. However, it was absolutely a requirement that Harry remain meaningfully connected to the world she had spent 7 decades serving, that he not allow the bonds to the United Kingdom and Commonwealth to be severed completely. The second major provision addressed Harry's children directly. A portion of the total inheritance, approximately £5 million, was designated specifically for Archie and Lilibet's education and upbringing. But once again, the money came with stipulations that revealed the Queen's deeper intentions. These funds were to be managed by trustees who would need approval from both Harry and the reigning monarch, which meant that King Charles would necessarily have some level of oversight in how the money was used. Even more significantly, Queen Elizabeth had specified that the children should spend meaningful time in the United Kingdom as they grew older. The stated purpose was clear and touching in its simplicity. She wanted to ensure that her great-grandchildren maintained their connection to their heritage and their family. She had written explicitly that these children should not become strangers to the land of their ancestors, a phrase that spoke volumes about her concerns for future generations. Perhaps the most revealing element of the entire provision was a personal letter that the Queen had attached to the legal document. Written in her own hand and addressed specifically to Charles, it was intended to be read when the clause was discovered, precisely as it had been on that November morning. In this letter, Elizabeth acknowledged the profound difficulty of the situation with Harry. She wrote that she understood the anger that many in the family felt, the deep hurt that his departure and subsequent public statements had caused, and the sense of betrayal that had coloured family relationships for years. These were not things she dismissed or minimised. She recognised them as real and valid emotions. But she also wrote something that cut directly to the heart of a mother's and grandmother's perspective, something that transcended questions of protocol, duty, or public perception. She stated plainly that Harry was still her grandson, that his children were still her great-grandchildren, and that she simply could not leave this earth without making one more attempt to ensure they would not be lost to the family completely. The bond of blood, in her view, carried obligations that survived even the most serious disagreements and the most painful public conflicts. The letter to Charles contained a request that was phrased not as a royal command, which she might well have been within her rights to issue, but rather as the hope of a dying mother who had run out of time to fix things herself. She asked him to consider that bridges once burned can sometimes be rebuilt, though only if both sides prove willing to supply the necessary materials. Her inheritance clause, she explained with characteristic clarity, was her attempt to supply those materials. What Charles and Harry chose to build with them, whether they would construct something resembling reconciliation or simply use them to mark the boundaries of continued separation, would be entirely up to them. But she wanted them to have the resources, both financial and emotional, to make the attempt if they proved willing. The legal team had spent considerable time confirming every aspect of the clause's validity. The Queen had consulted with her most trusted legal advisors in drafting it, people who had served her for decades and understood both the intricacies of estate law and the unique complexities of royal family dynamics. Every word had been chosen with extraordinary care to withstand any potential legal scrutiny and to make her intentions crystal clear. This was not a suggestion that could be easily dismissed or creatively reinterpreted to mean something other than what she had written. This was the will of a queen, backed by all the legal weight that such a document could carry. But more than that, it was the will of a mother and grandmother who had simply run out of time to fix things herself, but absolutely refused to give up trying, even knowing that she would not live to see whether her efforts succeeded. The amount of money involved was significant by most standards, but Queen Elizabeth had been shrewd enough to understand that the sum needed careful calibration. Too large an inheritance might create its own set of problems. It might make Harry appear to be bought, his reconciliation with the family reduced to a financial transaction in the eyes of the public and the press. It might fuel media narratives about special treatment or unfair favoritism that could damage both Harry's reputation and the monarchy's standing. £20 million was enough to provide genuine security and opportunity for Harry and his family, enough to remove financial stress as a complicating factor in family relationships. But it was not so overwhelmingly large that it would overshadow the deeper purpose of the provision, which had nothing to do with money and everything to do with connection, family, and preventing bonds from breaking completely. Reading through the document with growing understanding, Charles could almost hear his mother's voice in the phrasing. The language was unmistakably hers, combining practical considerations with emotional honesty, firmness of purpose with genuine hopefulness about what might be possible. Elizabeth had known with certainty that she was dying when she wrote these words. She had known that the situation with Harry would become Charles's problem to solve, that she was leaving behind unfinished business that would weigh on her eldest son's conscience and complicate his early years as king. And so she had left him this provision, this hidden clause that was really a tool, a burden, a gift, and a plea all rolled into one. Understanding why the Queen had created this provision required looking back at the evolution of her relationship with Harry, particularly during the tumultuous years following his departure from royal duties. Those who knew Elizabeth well had always observed that she maintained a special affection for Harry, something that had been evident since he was a young child. He had the ability to make her laugh in ways that few others could. He possessed an irreverent streak that some said reminded her of her own youth, before the weight of duty had transformed every spontaneous impulse into carefully measured protocol. The decision by Harry and Meghan to step back from royal life in January 2020 had genuinely blindsided the Queen. Sources close to the palace at the time, speaking to various media outlets, described her as both hurt and disappointed. The pain came not from Harry's desire for a different kind of life, which she might well have understood, but rather from how the announcement had been made. The lack of proper consultation, the way it forced the institution into a reactive position, responding to public declarations rather than working through issues privately, all of this had wounded her deeply. The interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021 had been even more difficult for Elizabeth to process. The allegations about racism within the family, the claims about insufficient support during Meghan's mental health crisis, the suggestion that the institution had been cold and uncaring in its response to a vulnerable member, all of this had struck at the very heart of what the Queen represented. She was the institution in many fundamental ways, and criticisms of it felt intensely personal. Her public response had been measured and diplomatic, including the now famous phrase, that recollections may vary, a careful way of suggesting that there were multiple perspectives on the events Harry and Meghan had described. But privately, those close to the Queen indicated that she was deeply troubled by the breakdown in family relationships and the very public nature of the conflict. What many people did not fully appreciate at the time was that throughout this entire period of public conflict and private pain, Queen Elizabeth had maintained channels of communication with Harry. They spoke on the phone with some regularity, not frequently perhaps, but often enough that the connection between grandmother and grandson was never completely severed. She made it clear to him, in ways that only a grandmother can, that she loved him regardless of the choices he had made or the path he had chosen. She did not agree with all of his decisions. She certainly did not appreciate the public airing of family disputes. But he remained her grandson, and that bond, to her way of thinking, was not something that palace politics or public controversies could fully break. Sitting in his private office with the documents still resting in his hands, King Charles faced a dilemma that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The personal dimension was impossible to ignore or set aside. This was his mother's dying wish regarding his son, the child he had loved from birth, worried about through difficult years, and yes, been genuinely angered and disappointed by in recent times. The wound that Harry's departure and subsequent actions had created was real and deep, affecting Charles not just as a king, but as a father who felt betrayed by public criticisms that had been broadcast to the entire world. But the constitutional dimension carried equal weight and perhaps even greater complexity. As monarch, every decision Charles made sent signals that extended far beyond the immediate family dynamics. Whatever choice he made regarding this inheritance would communicate something about his reign, his priorities, his vision for the monarchy's future, and his understanding of where family obligations ended and royal duty began. The relationship between Charles and Harry had deteriorated significantly in the years since the move to California. The public accusations made during the Oprah interview had stung deeply. The Netflix documentary series that followed, with its behind-the-scenes portrayal of royal life and its implicit criticisms of how the institution operated, had added fuel to an already burning fire. Then came Harry's memoir, a book that laid bare family conflicts and portrayed Charles not just as a distant father, but as someone unprepared and unsuited for the role of king. These criticisms, delivered to a global audience and turned into best-selling content, had wounded Charles in ways that went beyond ordinary family disagreements. He had spent his entire life, more than 7 decades, preparing to be king. Part of that preparation had necessarily involved developing what might be called a thick skin, an ability to withstand criticism and remain focused on duty regardless of public opinion. But criticism from your own son, broadcast to millions of readers and viewers around the world, cuts through even the most carefully constructed emotional defenses. The anger Charles felt was entirely real, and it coexisted uncomfortably with the love he still carried for Harry. These contradictory emotions created a constant internal tension that had no easy resolution. He was angry at what Harry had done, at the institution he had attacked, at the family secrets he had shared, at the pain he had caused other family members. But he was also still a father who remembered holding his newborn son, who had tried in his own imperfect way to be a good parent, who worried about Harry's well-being despite everything that had happened. These feelings did not cancel each other out. They simply coexisted, making every decision about Harry fraught with emotional complexity. William's reaction would matter tremendously in whatever Charles decided to do. The Prince of Wales had proven even more unforgiving than his father regarding Harry's departure and the public commentary that followed. The relationship between the brothers, once remarkably close and characterized by mutual support through difficult times, had fractured in ways that seemed perhaps beyond any realistic hope of repair. William viewed Harry's actions as betrayals that went beyond personal hurt. In his view, Harry had betrayed not just individual family members, but the institution of the monarchy itself, the very thing that William had dedicated his life to serving and would one day lead. He had advised his father on multiple occasions to take a firm line with Harry, to make absolutely clear that actions have consequences and that you cannot attack the family publicly while expecting to maintain private relationships as though nothing had happened. Charles arranged a private meeting with William for the following day. He knew the conversation would be difficult, but it was necessary. William had a right to know about the discovery before any decisions were made about implementation. More pragmatically, Charles needed his eldest son's support, or, at the very least, his understanding. If the king and the heir to the throne were visibly at odds over how to handle the Harry situation, it would create exactly the kind of visible family drama that weakened the monarchy's standing and provided endless material for media speculation and commentary. The meeting took place in Charles's private sitting room, away from staff and advisors. William arrived alone, having sensed from his father's tone when the meeting was requested that this involved something serious. When Charles explained what had been discovered in the estate documents, William's face visibly darkened. He listened without interrupting, which was his way when processing information he found disturbing. His jaw tightened progressively as more details emerged. When Charles finally finished the explanation, William's response came immediately and without hesitation. He believed their grandmother had overstepped badly. She had no right, in his view, to bind the family to conditions that would essentially require reconciliation with someone who had repeatedly and deliberately attacked them in public forums. The money itself was one thing, a straightforward inheritance that could be given or withheld. But requiring Harry to spend substantial time in the United Kingdom, giving both Harry and his father oversight roles in how Harry's children were raised and educated, this went too far. William characterized it bluntly as manipulation from beyond the grave, an attempt to control family dynamics, even in death. Charles allowed his son to express his anger fully without interruption. He understood where it came from and even shared portions of it. But he also knew his mother well enough to understand her motivations in a way that William, despite his own close relationship with his grandmother, perhaps could not fully appreciate. Elizabeth had asked him, as directly as a queen and mother could manage, to give Harry another chance, to use her final gift as an opportunity for healing rather than continued estrangement. The question that weighed on Charles was whether he could simply refuse that request. More fundamentally, whether he should refuse it. The conversation between father and son lasted well over an hour. No consensus emerged from it. William made his position absolutely clear with the kind of directness that characterized his approach to difficult issues. If Charles chose to honor this provision fully, to reach out to Harry and offer him the inheritance with all its attached conditions, then William would not actively stand in the way or create public conflict over it. But neither would he participate in any meaningful sense. He would not pretend that Harry's potential return to spending significant time in the United Kingdom was something he welcomed or supported. He would be civil if circumstances required it, maintaining basic courtesy at unavoidable family gatherings. But he would not go beyond that bare minimum. The wounds were simply too deep, the trust too thoroughly broken. Charles could play the role of forgiving father if he felt that was what duty or conscience required. William would remain the protective older brother who had not forgotten the pain Harry had caused to Catherine, to their children, to the institution they all served. Beyond the immediate family dynamics, Charles also had to consider broader implications for the monarchy as an institution. Public opinion regarding Harry and Meghan remained sharply divided across demographic and political lines. Some segments of the public saw Harry as essentially a victim of an outdated and rigid institution, a man who had made the brave choice to prioritize love and mental health over duty and tradition. Others saw him quite differently, as spoiled and ungrateful, someone willing to exploit his royal connections for commercial gain through Netflix deals and book contracts, while simultaneously attacking the very family that had given him every advantage in life. How the British public and the wider Commonwealth would react to news of a substantial inheritance with conditions seemingly designed to lure Harry back into the royal orbit was genuinely unpredictable. It could be interpreted as compassionate and family-oriented, evidence that the monarchy valued personal relationships over institutional pride. Or it could be seen as weakness, as allowing the institution to be held hostage by someone who had already taken so much and given very little in return. Charles's circle of advisors found themselves divided along somewhat predictable lines. The older generation, those who had served his mother for decades and remembered her approach to various crises, tended to counsel honoring her wishes fully and immediately. They spoke in terms of duty, of respecting the clearly expressed desires of the deceased, of the fundamental importance of family unity, even when it required swallowing pride and overlooking offences. The younger advisors, those who thought primarily in terms of public relations and the requirements of a modern monarchy operating in a social media age, expressed more caution. They worried about precedents being set, about appearing to reward what many viewed as bad behaviour, about the optics of Charles seeming to be controlled by his mother's wishes, even after her death, rather than acting as a fully independent monarch, making his own decisions. 3,000 miles away in Montecito, California, Prince Harry remained entirely unaware that his grandmother's will contained any provision specifically designed for him. He had no idea that his father had just made this discovery and was wrestling with questions about how to proceed. Harry's life in California had settled into patterns and rhythms that were simultaneously very different from his previous royal existence and surprisingly similar in certain fundamental ways. The Netflix projects required planning and execution. The memoir had demanded intense work and emotional processing. The various speaking engagements and public appearances still required a level of performance and public presentation that was not so different from royal duties, just with different masters and different protocols governing the arrangements. Financially, Harry and Meghan were secure but not as extraordinarily wealthy as many people assumed. The Netflix deal had provided substantial income, as had the Spotify agreement before it ended. The memoir had been a commercial success, but maintaining their lifestyle, covering the extensive security costs that came with their profile, and funding their various charitable initiatives required ongoing income generation. Harry had been born into wealth and privilege, certainly, but he had not inherited the kind of multi-generational fortune that would allow him to simply live comfortably off investment returns indefinitely. He needed to continue working and generating revenue, which meant navigating the complex and often contradictory relationship between his royal past and his commercial present. After careful consideration and consultation with his most trusted advisors, Charles's team recommended what they described as a hybrid approach to handling the situation. A formal legal notification would be prepared and sent through the proper official channels, informing Harry of the inheritance, laying out its specific conditions in clear legal language, and explaining the process that would need to be followed for claiming it. This would ensure that everything was handled correctly from a legal standpoint, with proper documentation and clear procedural guidelines. Simultaneously, Charles would compose a personal letter to accompany the legal documents. This letter would be brief and measured in tone, acknowledging the discovery of his mother's provision and expressing his intention to honour her clearly stated wishes. The letter would not plead with Harry or demand anything from him. Instead, it would simply open a door, creating space for conversation if Harry chose to walk through it. The timeline for Harry's response would carry significant weight in determining how events unfolded. The legal documents would specify a period, likely 90 days, during which Harry could formally accept or reject the terms of the inheritance as laid out by his grandmother. If Harry chose to accept, it would trigger a complex series of legal and practical steps. Trustees would need to be formally appointed and their roles clearly defined. Frameworks for monitoring compliance with the various conditions would need to be established and agreed upon by all parties. All of this would necessarily require ongoing communication between Harry's legal representatives and palace officials, creating regular interactions and exchanges that had been largely absent in recent years. If Harry chose outright rejection, the situation would be simpler in some respects, but potentially more complicated in others. From a purely legal standpoint, rejection would be straightforward. The funds would revert to the general estate and be distributed according to other provisions in the will. But the public relations implications of such a rejection would be substantial and long-lasting. Harry would inevitably be characterized in sharply different ways depending on the perspective of whoever was doing the characterizing. Some would see him as principled, as someone unwilling to accept conditions on his autonomy. Others would portray him as ungrateful, as turning down his grandmother's dying gift simply because it came with strings attached. The narrative battle would be fought across newspapers, television programs, and social media platforms for months. However, the most likely scenario, according to those familiar with how such situations typically unfold, might be neither immediate acceptance nor outright rejection, but rather negotiation. Harry's lawyers would almost certainly seek modifications to the conditions, arguing that certain requirements were too restrictive or simply impractical given his current circumstances. Perhaps the 90 days per year requirement could be reduced to 60 days, making it more manageable alongside his life and work in California. Perhaps the trustee arrangement for the children's funds could be modified to give Harry and Meghan more direct control, while still maintaining some oversight role for Charles. For King Charles, these potential negotiations would represent a significant test of his judgment and his understanding of his son. How much flexibility would he show in accommodating Harry's concerns? How rigidly would he insist on honoring the precise letter of his mother's wishes versus the broader spirit of what she was trying to achieve? Charles had accumulated decades of experience in negotiation and diplomacy through his various roles and responsibilities. But those skills had never been tested in circumstances quite this personal or quite this painful. The potential impact on other members of the royal family added additional layers of complexity. William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were Harry's niece and nephews, family connections that should naturally have been nurtured but had instead withered badly in the harsh climate of adult conflict. If Harry began spending significant time in the United Kingdom again, would there be genuine opportunities for these cousins to develop meaningful relationships with their uncle? Would William permit such interactions, or would he continue to maintain careful distance? The best-case scenario would involve Harry accepting the inheritance and genuinely embracing not just the letter, but the spirit of the conditions attached to it. He would spend his required time in the United Kingdom and Commonwealth nations as a meaningful reconnection with his roots. The interactions with family members would gradually thaw frozen relationships, creating space for honest conversations and eventual forgiveness. His children would develop real relationships with their grandfather, their uncle, their cousins, growing up with a genuine sense of connection to their British heritage. But the more realistic scenario would likely be something messier and more partial than complete reconciliation. Harry might accept the inheritance and make genuine efforts to meet the technical requirements of the conditions, but emotional distance might persist despite physical proximity. The relationships might remain cordial on the surface but cool underneath, functional for necessary occasions but not genuinely warm or deeply connected. The hidden clause in Queen Elizabeth's will had emerged from deliberate secrecy into the harsh and unforgiving light of reality. King Charles now held in his hands something that was simultaneously a burden and an opportunity, a final test from his mother, and perhaps also a final gift. What he and Harry ultimately chose to do with this unexpected provision would shape not just their personal relationship, but potentially the future trajectory of the monarchy itself. And across the considerable distance that separated London from California, a family's fate hung precariously in the balance, suspended somewhere between the undeniable pain of the past and the deeply uncertain possibilities of whatever might come next.